in your first.
Hi everyone, I'm here to talk to you about collaborating remotely with CAD as part of University Day. And so feel free as I'm talking to put any questions that you have inside of the chat, and I'll be happy to get to those at the end. So just a little bit about myself. So I'm actually an FRC Team 2648 alum. So that's a team up in Central Maine. And then I went to WPI to study biomedical engineering. I volunteer pretty often as a ref, scorekeeper, FTAA, kind of whatever I feel like I'm needed as. And then I more recently started mentoring Team 125 and also started working at PTC on the academic team. And so some of you may know, but PTC acquired Onshape almost a year ago now. And so I've really been working with schools on getting started with Onshape and also working a lot with FIRST teams in our FIRST relationship. And so I know this year things are obviously really different for teams. It's going to be a very different situation for everyone as you're all trying to figure out, are you able to be in person, virtual, or hybrid? And I know, especially in New England, like I said, I'm from Maine. That's where my family is and where my team was. And now I'm mentoring a team that's just outside of Boston. And so just thinking about the very different situations that those two places have, it's going to be such a difficult season to figure out, can we do anything in person with the team that's closer to Boston versus the team in Maine, maybe more likely to do some stuff. And so just trying to figure out how that's going to work, if they can have any build sessions, or if those build sessions are going to be limited to a certain number of people at a time, or what that will look like. And if there are events that do end up getting announced in January when FIRST reassesses, will anyone be able to travel? Again, there's out-of-state events in the New England district. Typically, there's only one event in Maine. So like, what will that look like for all of these teams? And so I know everyone's really facing all these different situations, but I also just want to start by saying there's still so much that teams can do this season. There's a lot that FIRST has put out that you can do as far as the innovation challenge that's coming and the game design challenge and remote events and the different robot activities. So I just want to make sure that teams really recognize that there's still a lot that they can do this fall to get ready for an eventual robot fabrication. I know many of you plan on using a lot of what you did last year or redesigning some of what you did last year. So there's a lot you can do to be ready for that. And also just to build your skills as you go further in FIRST and as far as you go into your potential engineering or other careers that you may have. And so I'd say 3D CAD is really a huge part of that. And so CAD is really a way of communicating designs. And if you think about how any part is manufactured, anything is manufactured, you think about the water bottle that I have on this screen, someone's going to design that in CAD before it actually gets created. And so having those skills and really understanding how CAD works and what you can do with it and how to design is going to help you so far in your FIRST career and then also in your future career. But I will also say I recognize I didn't do CAD when I was on a team. A lot of the times it's something that we kind of skip past. It's something that we can just say, oh, we don't really need to do it. I'm just going to start prototyping. I'm going to start trying things out and see what works. I think this year is really a season to dive into the CAD portion to get those skills so you can use them going forward. And so really why I think it's going to be so critical this season, especially, is just, it's going to really help you be more efficient with your time and your resources. So I know I've definitely heard this saying more than one time, measure twice and cut once. So the more that you can measure and check things out and make sure it'll work before you start actually fabricating and cutting stock or whatever else you need to do, the better off you're going to be, because you're probably not going to have to rebuild something again later. So if you can design virtually, so maybe if you have to start out the year where you aren't all in person together, if you can design virtually at the beginning, then you can be ordering the parts and ordering the stock and coming up with a plan for how you're actually going to go through your robot fabrication when the time comes. And maybe only a few people could be there in person, or if the whole team can be there, you can just be more efficient and know what you're going to do if you do some of that design up front. And so again, I think this year it's just such a different situation and what you may have to do and plan, that I think it's the perfect time to actually be working with CAD and start getting into those skills. But again, I do recognize that CAD can be really difficult for a lot of teams, if not impossible, depending on what you have for hardware. Like I said, I didn't do CAD when I was on a team, and that was because my school provided Macs to us. And so I just never had the opportunity to do CAD on a computer. Like I just didn't have a computer that could run it. And for our team, like you're already spending so much money to travel and to go all these places and to go to championship and everything else that's happening. And so spending money on CAD laptops for students, and then, okay, so maybe you get a couple kids a CAD laptop, or you have a couple computers in the lab at school or something like that. It's still not something that most people on the team can do. And so it's just so hard to get everyone able to do it. And so even if you get CAD and you all have your own computer with CAD installed, and then you have all your files that you're trying to send back and forth, maybe you use GrabCAD, or you can use Google Docs or Google Drive or something like that to send things back and forth. But you still end up with all of these systems that you're trying to run and get everyone set up on, and different hardware problems. If you have Chromebooks, if that's what your school gives you, you just can't do it when you're at home. And you end up, when you have files, having all of these copies everywhere. And do you have the latest copy? Or, oh, I had this really cool design last night and I redid this, but the person over here didn't account for that. So they've been designing with the initial plan. And so it gets kind of hindering for your team if you're just sending all these copies back and forth and trying to understand what the files are and where they are and getting people up to speed. You have to email someone to get your team licenses in a lot of cases. And so there's just all of these problems that teams can really face that make it not possible to do CAD. And so I think, too, going forward, Onshape really is going to make it so that more teams have access and can be doing it. So it's not just a couple kids or no one on the team doing it, but every single person can have access to what the team is doing and be collaborating remotely this year. And so I like to put up this quote. John Hirschtick actually initially founded SolidWorks, and then he left SolidWorks, I think about 7 or so years ago, to found Onshape. And one of the things that he really is proud of is that we designed Onshape to get technology out of the way of learning. So we're really trying to make it so that all of those problems don't hinder your team. And so this year, you should be able to collaborate and work together without having to face a lot of those problems. And so what is different about Onshape that's really going to help your team this season especially? It runs in a browser, so you can use it on Chrome, Safari, or whatever else you use, not Internet Explorer, those older browsers, but any modern browser. So you can use a PC, you can use a Mac, you can use a Chromebook, whatever your school gives you. So there's no download installation. You don't have to reach out to me for a license file. You can just get started on your own. You can also download an iPad app or a phone app or Android, whatever you want to have it on, which is really nice, especially when you're at your build space. Say you've done your CAD and then you're going to cut something or manufacture something some other way. You can actually be pulling it up on your phone to just double check something before you cut, or if you think that there's something that you might want to change, you can be looking at it on your phone or your iPad, which is really helpful. You can CAD simultaneously. It acts a lot like Google Docs, in that you can be doing things at the same time and be seeing that instantly instead of waiting for someone to send you information. And then you can also go and see the version history. So if you wanted to look and see what a teammate did yesterday, you could be kind of going back through what they did. For anyone who's done any programming with GitHub, there's also a GitHub style branching and merging. So if you wanted to try some different variations of a design, you can be doing that and seeing what it's like. There's also no crashing or losing data. So if suddenly your internet cuts out or your computer shuts off, everything is just stored on the cloud as you go. So you'll never worry about losing what you've done. And then it's also really rapidly growing. So there's more and more professional users using it constantly. So it's really a great skill to develop as you do think about your future career. And so now I'm going to go into Onshape to show you a few of the things that I think are most important and most critical for FIRST teams. Oops. Here we go. And so to get started inside of Onshape, all you have to do is go to this onshape.com/education plan and sign up. If you're a student or a mentor, you can sign up here, get access instantly. It'll just send you an email to verify your account and you're ready to go. So there's, again, no waiting on us or trying to figure things out. You can get access pretty immediately. And then when you get inside of Onshape, it, again, feels a lot like Google Docs. You can have everything organized in folders. You can also create a team, which is a really great way to quickly share information out with everyone that you need to on your team. And so one team there's a couple of things I'd recommend you doing to set up. But one is if you do FTC or any FTC design, if you email first@ptc.com, you can actually get added to this team that has all of the different common FTC parts. Team 2901 created this, and they've been sharing it out with everyone. Not everything from all of these manufacturers is in there, but they have a lot of different parts from a lot of the different FIRST suppliers. So this will be a really quick way to be able to insert parts or the COTS parts that you're buying and adding to your robot. And there's also public documents. And so inside of public, you can be searching for some different things. MKCAD is the FRC group that's been working on making a lot of public parts for FRC teams. So I probably should have searched something more specific, but for example, you can see the MKCAD group has been putting together some different sensors and bearings and sprockets. And so you can be searching for those and inserting them into your design. And so Chief Delphi, they've put up some really good instructions on like the best practices and ways to use those. So I definitely recommend taking a look there to be able to find out how to use a lot of these parts. So then inside of Onshape, there are no files. Files are a thing of the past, aren't using those anymore. And so there's what's called a document. And inside of each document, there's a bunch of different tabs. And so there's tabs that are part studios, which is where you can make a whole bunch of different parts. You can also have your assemblies as a tab inside of one document. And so if you do end up with a ton of tabs in one document, it can kind of get a little bit slower to load. So I'd recommend no more than about 40 tabs in a document, but you can still do a lot inside of one. And you can insert things from other documents. So say you think it's easier for your team to have a sub-team working inside of one document. You could have a document that's your full robot. You could have a document for the drivetrain, or just however you think is going to be easiest to organize yourself, you could do. And so here I can click share. And so I can share to individuals on my team. Maybe I'm working on something with just a couple people before sharing with the broader team. You can make a team that is your entire team or your sub teams. So you can be sharing with multiple people at once. You don't have to remember to copy and paste everyone's emails every time. You can also make documents public, which is something I really encourage teams to do to act as a resource and help for other teams. So if you make your document public, someone could search for it later on. And so it's just another great way to collaborate within FIRST and to have that competition that we always like to see teams doing. You can also turn on link sharing. And so this is a great way if you wanted to send your CAD off to a sponsor, or to send it to maybe even the parents on your team or someone else that you just want to show, maybe your school board or your principal. You can turn on link sharing, and they don't even need to make an Onshape account. And they can just get that link, copy it to their clipboard, and go right to that document. And so they won't be able to edit it if they don't have an Onshape account, but they can still go in and view everything and see what you've been working on and what you've done. So it's a really great way to share your work and show the world what you've done this past season. Another great feature for especially this season is when you're working with multiple people. So you can see that I am signed into this document twice. You can see my face up there. So if you have more than one person working on CAD at the same time, and maybe you want to do a design review, or for whatever reason, just talk about the CAD or work on it or see what they're doing. If you're just curious, maybe you're a mentor and you're checking out what the other people on your team are doing, you can double click on their picture up here, or their name or their initials, whatever is showing for them. And so I'm going to move the model on the bottom screen. And so as the other person is doing work, you can actually see what they're doing and be in follow mode. And so if I want to zoom in on something and see what's going on here, I can actually do that and be following along with what that person's doing. So it's a really great way just to work together and collaborate. If I'm working on a sketch, let me see. I can edit this sketch, and then I can see what that person is doing as they're making those edits. So it's a really, again, great way to work remotely when you can't be in the same room seeing what someone's doing. Comments are also another great feature that are going to be really critical for teams this year. If you click on the comments button up here, so maybe I wanted to tag myself to review something. If you want to ask a mentor, can you look this over before we actually fabricate it? So I can actually also tag which part I'm talking about, because that's kind of a broad thing to say. So maybe I want them to look over this part right here. And so I've added that little tag there, and I can add the comment. And then if you're like me and have Onshape installed on your phone or your tablet or wherever else, you'll get a whole bunch of notifications there too. So maybe if you're walking around the build space or somewhere else, you can take a quick look on your phone and see, oh, hey, I got this notification. Maybe I should check out what they're doing, and can be a lot more mobile too when you're actually working that way and doing design that way. So it's, again, easier to see what people are talking about if you aren't doing things at the same time. You think about if we aren't having the traditional meetings like teams tend to do, it's going to be really important to have these other ways of communicating and working together. So comments are going to be a really helpful way this season to be talking with other people on your team and letting them know what you're doing. And so then another thing that's really helpful too as you go through is you don't just have to have parts and assemblies inside of your Onshape document. You can also upload PDFs. So in this example, I put in the game manual. So if you wanted to have the game manual uploaded, you could do that. So you could be quickly referring to it instead of having to go find it somewhere else. You can just stick it right inside of your Onshape document. You can also, there's some external applications that you can use. And one of those that I absolutely recommend doing and getting is the link tab application. It's completely free. So you can have a tab in your Onshape document that is a link. So here I put in a Google Doc as my link tab. And so maybe if you wanted to take your notes on your design reviews or whatever else you want to do, you can actually be putting a Google Doc right inside of Onshape and be making edits to it as you go along. And so like you can be adding things here and be really working collaboratively and knowing kind of what's happening without having to be in the same space. Especially I'd say for FTC, this is a pretty critical way and a really interesting way to keep your engineering notebook together. But you don't have to remember to keep going and finding that Google Doc, just putting it right inside of your CAD so that as you're doing your design, you can be taking those notes and be having that right there. So that's another pretty critical part. And the other thing that I'd like to point out, so here's my little FTC robot. This year, a lot of us may not get to see the FTC field or maybe even any fields in person. And so what we can do here is actually take the CAD of the field and insert your robot on top of that CAD or on top of that model. And so if you have the assembly of the field inserted, you can then insert your robot assembly on top of it. And so maybe in this year's case, I want to move my robot over. Oops. Just slide it around. Maybe I want to move my robot over to wobble goals. Just help if I was clicking the right buttons as I'm doing this. It's harder to use the larger mouse. If I want to move my robot over toward the wobble goal or something like that, I could do that just to see if things are lining up and be measuring and checking that out. And so there's a lot of great features that I can show too as you want to insert parts. Say you wanted to insert something from those kit of parts, you can be going to other documents and be finding FTC robotics parts users and be quickly adding parts from major suppliers that you'll be using. And so, like I said, this year is going to be a very different season, so different type of CAD and different way of running your team, but this is going to be a really fast way to get everything together. And what's also useful about this, like I said, if you're doing your design ahead of time, Onshape has a really great way of building out the bill of materials for you. So as you're designing and using a lot of those supplier parts, it'll be a really fast way to go in and find and add, go and buy the things that you've designed with. So you can make sure to have those all ready for you, ready to go as you start your season. And so it's going to be really helpful to you to do as much of this as you can kind of remotely and figuring it out. That way you aren't wasting that precious time you may get in your build space. So I also briefly mentioned the App Store. So I'll go over there quickly and show you some of the interesting apps that are most useful to FIRST teams. Reality Server allows you to do some really cool rendering of your robot. So if you wanted to make something look more realistic, if you wanted to put something on a pit display, if that happens, or sponsor letters or something else, you can use this rendering app and you get 2 free hours a month. So that's typically enough to, once your robot is done, to make those really cool renderings of your robot. CAM, there's some different integrators and connectors here. Kirimoto is completely free. So if you need to do any CAM, you can be doing that right inside of Onshape with Kirimoto. And then, like I mentioned, there's also the utilities is the link tab, which is super, super useful as you want to do some Google Docs or other things inside of your Onshape document. So if I go back over into Onshape, the other thing I'll say is this year is really different in that, I mean, many mentors are teachers also, so they realize how hard it is to teach some things virtually. You can't be in the same room with someone. It can be really hard to kind of sit side by side and work on something. But there's also this learning center inside of Onshape that can help you get started with CAD. As we go into the learning center, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do here. There's some different videos. The learning pathways are a really great place to start. I would recommend if your team is thinking about using Onshape this season, going here and finding the Introduction to CAD pathway. It's really great for anyone who has never even used CAD before to start learning about the key concepts and the key terminology inside of CAD as you get started. And there's also the Onshape Fundamentals pathway. So if you are someone who's more familiar with CAD and just want to kind of get started on what Onshape's terminology is and what's different there, that's a great place to go to kind of find out that information. And so that's pretty much the big key features that I think are going to be important for teams collaborating remotely this season. There's a lot that you can do to kind of be helping each other out and be working remotely. And again, I think this is just so important to teams that haven't been able to use CAD because you haven't been able to have the hardware. But that's just so important to me that everyone be able to do it if they want to and have the opportunity regardless of what device you have. And so you can be using this on your Chromebook or your Mac or whatever else, and everyone on the team can be working together and learning CAD for one of the first times this season. Looks like there are a few questions. Oh, yep. So the first question was, do you have any tutorials we can use to teach my team members? And so something else I'll also point out, if you go to onshape.com/edu/FRC, there's this great guide that I put together with some other people on my team talking about getting started with Onshape for FIRST teams. And so this walks you right through from getting an account. It brings you to that free account page. Getting oriented, there's the 2 different learning pathways that I mentioned, so that Introduction to CAD learning pathway and the Onshape Fundamentals pathway. There's an article about the best ways to get started, so from importing CAD data from other CAD systems, how you want to actually set up your team inside of Onshape when you make the team, like what permissions you should give everyone, those types of things. And then I mentioned briefly the 2 sets of kit of parts. There's the one for FRC teams, which is the MKCAD library. And then for FTC teams, 2901 built this beautiful team as well. So email first@ptc.com to get access to that library. But the MKCAD one, those are a bunch of different documents that you can just find in the public documents. You don't need to be given access to any of those. And then we also, this past spring, we actually did a design competition for FIRST teams. And as part of that, we did a whole bunch of different webinars. And so some of these have some really great information too about getting started with Onshape, working with the kit of parts, migrating from other CAD systems, and that sort of collaboration piece of things. Oh, I did forget to mention the version management. So inside of every Onshape document, you can see the versions and history. So you can see everything that's been done. So maybe you were wondering, like, what did my team member do last night? So you can look here. You can create new versions as you go along. And then you can also make those branches. So I can branch to create a workspace and be working inside of that branch instead of in the main workspace. If I wanted to say, try out something different on the catapult mechanism. Maybe I wanted to see if I could do a different claw piece to it. I could actually be making a different branch so that I'm not messing up what my other teammates are doing and trying something out and then merging those two together as I'm ready to do so. And then there's just a bunch of other resources if your team may need them, but this is a great document just for teams to kind of go through and get started. And then there's another question about how powerful of a computer do I need to run Onshape? Can it run on a Mac or computer without a dedicated graphics card? So it definitely can run on a Mac. It doesn't really need anything too powerful. If you have like a ultra old Chromebook, you may have some trouble with it. The way to check if you can use it is go to cad.onshape.com/check, and that will actually run a check of your system and tell you if it's compatible. And sometimes there's people have done some stuff with their WebGL that may kind of throw Onshape off. And so this will tell you what you need to fix if you're having some issues. And yeah, so there's a question about professional certification in Onshape. And so yeah, that just recently was launched. So that's the higher level professional certification. And we are currently working on a student certification. I don't know exactly when we're sure that's going to come out. I believe I want to say by the end of this school year, but I'm not positive. So I would keep an eye out on it, but we are actively working on something like that. And yeah, so there's a question about if I want to move to Onshape this season, is there an easy way to bring in last year's CAD model from another software like SolidWorks? And there definitely is. So you can import and export with Onshape. So when I add something I can import, I should have had some other CAD files ready to go. But yeah, so you can import. There's a whole bunch of different file formats that we will accept. Let me go to our help center. Yeah, so you can go through here and this will tell you all of the different files that can be imported somewhere. This is going through step by step. And so yeah, there's so many different types of CAD files and then other files that can be imported into Onshape. So SolidWorks definitely can. The one thing, this will also go through working with those files. Sometimes, pretty frequently, the mates are different from one CAD format to another. And so you may have to do some, add some mates in when you're assembling. So say, for instance, if you're importing a motor and you want to make sure that it has that rotational motion, you may need to add that inside of Onshape. It might not get imported correctly, but that's about as much as you would probably have to do. And then for running Onshape in a classroom, definitely. So as far as classrooms go, we actually have a couple of specific resources for educators about getting Onshape set up for the classroom. If you email first@ptc.com, I can send you those specific documents. We have some different exercises. We also have an instructor community on our forum, and that's a great place to find. One of my colleagues every week has been putting some different example lesson plans. And so there's a ton of stuff there for running Onshape in a classroom. And then also, so the other thing that we do have as well for teachers is there's another version of Onshape. The standard version is what everyone inside of FIRST is typically using, but the enterprise version, if you're having any issues getting emails set up or sent to your students, or you want some better management and analytics around what's going on in your classroom, you can also look into the enterprise version of Onshape, and that has a lot of great tools for teachers too. And so then the next question is, I'm fluent in SolidWorks. How much of a learning curve is it to use Onshape? Part studios, not sure I understand those. And so in general, it's very similar, especially part studios are basically, it's like making a part file inside of SolidWorks. Let me go to my part studio. So it's similar to a part file, but the difference is that you can make a whole bunch of parts inside of one tab. And that way, so if you have related sketches, you can be making changes and having them reflect across multiple parts. So say, for example, I want to make my belly pan would be smaller. I could also have it so that, I guess the belly pan is not a good example, but say I wanted to make the side of my drivetrain smaller, I could make it so that my bumpers also became smaller because they're interrelated inside of one part studio, instead of when you make a change over here, you then have to go update all of the other part files. So it allows you to more quickly make those changes across multiple parts and have them all related in a way that helps your team out greatly. And then are there any practical limits to the number of people who can be editing one file? Oh wait, so sorry. One thing I meant to mention. So the other thing that's kind of different when you're using SolidWorks is when you're assembling something, mates inside of Onshape are usually the thing that I get the most kind of pushback on, that they feel different when using Onshape instead of SolidWorks. Mates are almost a more simplified version. You have fewer clicks to get the same result. And so you can still have all of that basic motion inside of the robot. So I can be moving my catapult, I could be spinning my wheels and all of that stuff. I can see how the robot would move. But again, it's just a more simplified way that takes fewer clicks to get that motion. And so then the next question was, are there any practical limits to the number of people who can be editing one file? How does CADing work with someone else in the same file? So the big thing too is it's just like a Google Doc. So if you're typing on a Google Doc with someone else, yes, if you're trying to both type in the exact same sentence, it can be really annoying. So maybe if you're working on the very same like measurement of something or the same part of a sketch, that could be annoying, just like working on a Google Doc if you're trying to type at the same spot would. But if you're working on an assembly, maybe I'm editing this part of the claw or adding something up here and there, maybe adding something to the drivetrain, you shouldn't get in each other's way at all. Like you are working on in the same space, but will be in the same exact sort of spot. And the other question I get a lot too is like, is there a limit to how many people can be working in the document? Not that I've seen. There are teams that will have 20 people all in there looking to do a review, or maybe you're working in different tabs. So theoretically, you could have an unlimited number of people in there, but yeah, if you get too many trying to do the same thing, it can be cumbersome. And then the next question, can you make and print part drawings? Yes, so you can make a drawing inside of Onshape. So that can be another tab, so I'll just stick with this format. So yeah, you can make drawings just like you would in any other CAD tool. It's gonna take it a second to load the drawing. And so yeah, you can insert your different parts. So if I wanna look at my catapult parts, maybe I'll do a cooler part than that. I'll do my side panel. And so yeah, I can insert the different views of my side panel as I want to for the drawing, and so you can have those for manufacturing. And so with drawings and with parts too, you can export. So I could export the drawing as a PDF if I wanted to for printing, or there's a couple other file formats that may be helpful if you need a DWG. You can also be exporting those. Oh, and then the next question is pretty related. So then when you look at your parts, yes, you can also export STL files for 3D printing. So let's say, I'll take this piece of 1x2. I can export it in a whole bunch of different formats. So STEP, STL, like I mentioned, there is some integrated CAM if you wanted to do that as well, to be outputting some G code if you needed that. For 3D printing software, there isn't any specific 3D printing software. I think Kirimoto, you can also use it for some 3D printing, but typically you would just export the STL and use that in your 3D printing software. I know most printers are pretty specific about what they want to work with anyway. So at this point, it just makes sense to do that export and use it in whatever you need to. And so you can export parts or assemblies as you need to. And so when you have this part studio with a whole bunch of parts listed, you can just come over here and find the part you need and export one by one. The next part, oh yeah. For a long time, I couldn't figure out how to add custom mass properties such as the weight of a motor. And yes, you can definitely do that inside of Onshape. So again, I'll take my 1x2 right here. You can assign a material to it. So let's say I want it to be aluminum. I can select that. Oops. Have that be my material if I wanted to, or a custom material, whatever makes sense to you to have. And then, because I already have assigned that there, that's why it didn't let me add it. You can also edit the appearance if you want to, so I can make it be a fun color. Let's say I want to make my 1x2 purple instead. I can be assigning colors. And so then once you have those properties assigned, in the bottom right corner, you can see the mass properties. So now I can see the mass and volume and everything else of my part. And so when you're importing, you can also be doing that as well, I believe. So if you're importing a motor, I think you can do that. I know all the parts that 2901 did, they are very specific about making sure that all of those properties were present and that everything acts the way that you would expect it to. So again, if you're importing a motor, if you're using one of the motors from that library, they made sure that all of those motors have that correct motion, or bearings or things like that. Something else I'll also show that reminded me of, when you're using those parts from 2901, let me see. So for example, let's go to Servo Cities, structural components. So when you're using things like channel, you can actually make it so that it's configurable. So when I go to insert it, I know Servo City has channel and they sell it all these different lengths. So I can just select the length of channel that I want to use. So let's say I go with something 21 inches. I can then insert it at that length. And then if I wanted to, I could change it later on as I'm going along. So you can have those configurable parts, or same thing with inside of your robot. Maybe you have a couple different configurations. You can actually make those configurations in CAD. So you could click back and forth between the two and see what those look like. And so here you can see I have my long channel, and then I could right click it and actually change that configuration if I wanted to. And go back to a different length if, as I was making my design, I realized, oh wait, that was way too long. It's more than 18 inches, so it's not going to fit inside of my starting configuration. I can go back and make those changes as needed. And so that'll be pretty helpful too. And I think actually too, something good to show would be from that design competition, if you search for robots to the rescue, you can see all those robots that were submitted in our design competition this spring. And there were some really good ones that did a great job of, let's search that specific one. They did a really good job of using configurations in Onshape to show the judges what the different configurations of the robot would be. And so especially this year too, like we don't know what remote judging is going to look like. So the more that you can set yourself up to show judges by making those Google Docs or making these configurations, I think that'll be really helpful to set yourself up to have everything you need when the time comes. This one has a lot of parts, so it can take a little bit to load. And then there's another question too that I'll answer while this one starts to load, which is, are there any links between Onshape and Creo or other PTC software? Can some of my team use Creo and others use Onshape? So yes, you could do that. So PTC acquired Onshape in November of last year. And so they're completely separate CAD systems, and they will always be separate CAD systems. There are going to be features that Onshape has that Creo says, hey, that's great, we should add that too. And then Creo may have some more advanced simulation and things like that, or some other features that Onshape doesn't have yet that will kind of go back and forth between the two. But right now, the biggest thing is Creo acts a lot like any other CAD software to Onshape, where you can import and export files between the two formats. But whenever you're doing that with any CAD software, you can kind of lose a little bit when you're doing that. And so you may have to recreate some of those mates or those other features as you're going along. So you could do that and have some people using Creo and others using Onshape, but you are going to have to do double work later on if you're going back and forth too much. So as it's loaded, so you can see here there's configurations in the top left. And so, for example, they have a couple of flags on the bottoms. And so we can make those flags extended. Is one of the configurations. So I can make those flags extend. If I want to see the light covered or uncovered, I can do that as well. It's taking a minute to catch up to me, but so again, if your robot has a starting configuration that's smaller, and then it expands to a larger configuration, you can absolutely be showing those configurations inside of the CAD. So it's a great way to, I guess, have all of that easily accessible to your team. All right. And so I think that's it for questions. But if you have any more, absolutely feel free to reach out to first@ptc.com. There's also, again, I mentioned those resources on our learn.onshape.com and then the PTC YouTube channel. So if there's any resources you're looking for, you can go there, or you can email us. If you're mentioning that you were teaching it in your classroom and you have any questions about that, happy to get in contact to talk about some of the stuff we have for teachers specifically, and share that with you as well. So thank you all so much. It was great sharing this with you all, and